Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite books about hauntings. So a few weeks ago, I put out a video where I mentioned that I was thinking about making a video talking about books that are books that I really enjoy that are about haunted houses. So after I come through all of the books that I've read, realized that I haven't read a ton of books that are specifically about haunted houses. Though I have read a good number of books that are just about general hauntings. So this is a list of some of those books. I actually have my top 5 favorite books that I'm going to share with you, my top 5 favorite books that have to do with hauntings. But I do have some honorable mentions that I would like to start with. I have come up with some subcategories, some subgenres, I guess, for these books to just give you a better idea of what they're about. That way I don't have to go into great depth about any one of them. The vast majority of these are pretty popular books, so I'm sure most of you have probably heard of all of these, but hopefully there's at least one or two on here that either you haven't heard about or you've been kind of thinking about picking up, and I can convince you to give it a shot. So I think I'm going to ease us into this video first off by talking about books that are more about what I would call emotional hauntings. The first of those is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. This is about a woman who goes back home. Her mother is dying and she's helping to sort of pack up the house. And this is a story about a woman who is haunted by her past and her family's past. This is a very emotionally charged book, so just know going into this you might want to look up some trigger warnings if you have past like family traumas or whatever. I did really enjoy this. I think that the writing style is wonderful, and it is definitely a great choice if you want to pick up a book about sort of a person who's sort of being haunted by their past and their past family traumas. Next up for an emotional haunting type of book is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is, speaking of trigger warnings, definitely something that you're going to want to look up for this book as well, and also the third one I'm going to talk about in this category. All of these, definitely look up trigger warnings. This is about a young woman who is being haunted by grief. She has experienced death in the family and is being haunted by what she thinks is her mother in the form of a bird. This is actually a really beautiful story. I know that sounds strange, but this is a really beautiful story, and just such an intimate portrait of what someone, sort of the emotional state of a person who is trying to cope with the loss of a parent. Fair warning, if you do decide to pick this one up, absolutely bring a hanky. This is a tearjerker. And last of the 3 I will recommend in the sort of emotionally haunted category is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is definitely my favorite of the 3. Sorry, this has like a little plastic coating on it, so it's kind of reflective. Sorry about that. This is also, look up trigger warnings for this, as I mentioned a moment ago. This has to do with a young man whose mother is dying of a terminal illness, and he's trying to cope with this sort of inevitable loss he is about to experience. This creature, this monster it's almost like it's haunting him, but in trying to kind of help him come to terms with the situation that he's in. The Astonishing Color of After, bring a hanky for this, bring the whole box, because this is a rough ride, but it is absolutely beautiful. This is a beautiful story, and if you can handle it, if you can handle like the emotions that you will very likely feel reading this, it is absolutely worth it. My next subcategory of hauntings is haunted cities or towns. So the first on this list for me is The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is set in the 20s in New York City. This spirit-invoking game that these teenagers play ends up inviting this sort of evil presence into the city, and as a result, some crazy, dark, haunted things start to happen. I'll just leave it at that. This is a really fun series. It's pretty dark, but I really enjoy it. I think these are technically YA books, so they are a little dark for YA, but nonetheless, this is a really fun book. The OG haunted town book is It by Stephen King. I don't know, I'm guessing that most of you probably have either read this or have heard of it or have watched the movies. You probably know what it's about, so I'm not going to go into great depth about it, but this is a story of a town that is haunted by this presence, has been haunted by this presence for, I guess, hundreds of years, and these kids that are trying to figure out what's going on and eradicate it. It is absolutely one of Stephen King's best. I think most people would agree it's one of his best, if not his best, though it does have some questionable scenes in it. If you have read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are a horror reader, if you like hauntings, if you, for any reason, have not read this but have read other Stephen King books and have not read this one, you really need to read it. You really need to give it a shot. It's a super long book, but it is definitely worth the effort. And my third and final honorable mention subcategory of horror is Gothic horror, which, to be fair, I have only read 2, and I'm going to mention both of them now. Gothic horror isn't really necessarily my thing, so I haven't really been seeking it out, though I wouldn't be opposed to reading more. The first one is Mexican Gothic. It's about a woman who gets a letter from her cousin, I think, who has been married to this man in some town in Mexico. She doesn't come out and say exactly what's wrong, but something is wrong, something is going on. The main character, the protagonist, doesn't know what it is exactly. So she decides she needs to go down to this house to visit her cousin and try to figure out what's going on. And it is the creepiest house, this creepy haunted feeling house down in Mexico. Weird stuff is happening. It really sets an atmosphere, as Gothic horror stories tend to do. Sometimes you read stories about hauntings and it's never quite explained, but this one does explain it. So if you prefer a haunting story that it comes out in the end and tells you exactly what is happening and explains it very well, this may be the one for you. Also, for Gothic horror novels, The Death of Jane Lawrence. This book doesn't have the highest of ratings, but I really, really liked it. It's about a woman who ends up marrying this doctor who owns this house out in the country and has told her that she cannot go to this house, and is kind of a stipulation for him being willing to marry her. She has to agree that she'll never go out to this house in the country, but by some twist of fate ends up having no choice but to go out to this house in the country and discovers a strange house. Her husband is acting strange. Something really bizarre is going on, and the story goes from there. This, I think, probably has low ratings because it is pretty out there. It kind of goes off the rails a little bit. So if you pick this up, do be aware of that you need to buckle up for a rough ride, because this goes into some pretty strange territory. But if you can sit back and be ready to just kind of enjoy the ride and not get too invested in every last thing like making absolute sense, then I think that you might have a good chance of really enjoying this one as well. Actually, I forgot there is one more that I wanted to mention, a final honorable mention, and this is actually in the short story subcategory of hauntings, and it is We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone by Ronald Malfi. Now, every story in this book isn't a haunting, but a good enough chunk of them give that feel that it, I think, fairly makes its way onto this list. I enjoyed this so much that I have added a couple other Ronald Malfi books to my TBR, and I'm really looking forward to them. The primary theme of this book is exactly what it sounds like. We should have left well enough alone, but we didn't. Therefore, we're having to deal with XYZ consequences. And these stories, quite a few of them, are more than a little disturbing. So just know that going into it. This is a great collection though, and I absolutely recommend it if you like short story collections that kind of have sort of a horror feel to them. All right, so we are now at my top 5 favorite books about hauntings. I'm going to start with number 5 and work my way up to number 1. In the number 5 slot, we have The Anomaly by Michael Rutger. This is not about a haunted house. This is about a haunted cave. It is about a man who takes a group up into to find this cave up in the wall of the Grand Canyon. This main character, the protagonist, he's kind of like an Indiana Jones type of character. And the reason he's taking this group up to find this cave is because supposedly some explorer around the turn of the century went into this cave, found some cave, and vanished. So he's going and taking this group to try to kind of unravel this mystery. This I would recommend to people who want kind of a non-traditional haunting story. Also, this is not scary. I would call this kind of creepy. It has a couple kind of creepy and unsettling parts in it, but this is not a scary book by any stretch of the imagination. It's really more of just kind of makes you feel a little unsettled, but is overall really more of an adventure story. I read this whenever it came out for Book of the Month, so I guess that was in June of 2018, 5 years ago, and it has still stuck with me. I absolutely recommend it to fans of non-traditional hauntings that are more fun than scary. Number 4 on the list, we have Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This is a really fun book. It is set in a sort of IKEA-like store that has some sort of strange occurrences that have been happening, and a handful of the employees get talked into spending the night in the store to like see if they can figure out what's going on. Some really messed up stuff happens to them while they are in the store that night. This book has a lot of dark humor in it. However, I would say, though it is humorous and it's a super fun read, this could be quite frightening to you if you are not into horror and you're not into hauntings. So if you are scared easily, if you're a sensitive reader, be very well aware of that before you pick this book up. But if you really like hauntings and horror and you can kind of get on board with something like that, then this might be the book for you. Number 3 on the list is A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. I own this book and I cannot find it. I have searched high and low and I do not know where it has gone. This is also a book that doesn't have the highest of ratings, primarily I think because the ending, I think for most people, is very unsatisfying. If you can handle kind of an out there ending that doesn't explain much, then you may really enjoy this one. This is actually kind of a coming of age story, and it is what you would call a haunted house, but the house is literally at the bottom of a lake. A couple gets on a rowboat, they row out into this lake, they go through a tunnel sort of thing, go out and find this other pool that's sort of this hidden, tucked away little like pond lake thing. And as they're rowing across it, they look down, and in the water they can see there is the roof of a house. There is a house down in the lake. And so they decide to go down and explore it, which creeps me out. That thought, just like really freaks me out. If large bodies of water creep you out too, you may find this as like horrifying as I did, but they become very obsessed with it and start spending like every waking moment that they can scuba diving down into this house at the bottom of the lake, and some weird stuff happens in there. The sort of atmosphere that it has, the mood that it sets, I think it's a great book. Be prepared if you pick it up to have a possibly not the most satisfying ending, but if you're okay with that, I absolutely would recommend that you give this one a shot. All right, and number 2 on the list, also not a haunted house, but a haunted motel, is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is a story that is sort of told in 2 parallel timelines. The first one I think is like set in the early 80s. The other one is set in modern day. And the modern day one, it's following a girl whose aunt had disappeared from this hotel in the 80s, which is the other timeline that this book is following. And she decides to get a job at this motel to try to figure out what happened to her aunt so many years ago, trying to, unravel that mystery. And there are some very creepy things that happen in this motel. For me, this book felt very like high tension, high stakes, so it was a lot of fun to read. And I just really like the kind of non-traditional, like not a haunted house, but definitely a haunted motel sort of idea, sort of concept. I feel like most people that I hear talking about it have pretty like strong positive reactions to it as well. So if you haven't picked this one up and it sounds remotely intriguing to you, then I would absolutely recommend that you give it a shot. And last but not least, my number 1 favorite haunting story is A House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. This is by far one of the most unsettling books that I have ever read. This is kind of a story within a story. The main story, I would say, is of a family that moves into a house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. There are blank pages. There's pages where you have to, like pages that only have a couple words on them. There's pages where it's all written backwards, so you have to look at it in a mirror. It's fairly convoluted, I guess, but in a good way, I think. Just know that going into this, you really have to put work into this book to enjoy it. This is not an easy read, but if you're willing to work for it and put in the effort, this is such a fun, wonderful book. It is very thematically rich. It is really heavy in symbolism. It's just incredibly well written. I don't know. I don't think it's for everyone. Like I said, like you have to be ready to put in some real work for this book, but If you are like, absolutely pick this up. I've never read anything like this. This is just such a cool book. So if you have any interest in this at all, I really hope that you will give it a shot. Okay, so I think that is going to be it for me today. Those are some of my favorite books about hauntings that I've ever read. I would be curious to know if you have read any of them and what you thought about them. Also, do you have any good haunting recommendations? If you do, I hope that you will mention them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you will like it and possibly subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.